Hello friends, welcome to the Stand Up Coder. I am Vivek Thakkar and in this session we will explore how to integrate the PhonePe payment gateway using Node.js and ExpressJs. First let's begin by referring to the PhonePe API documentation. So inside the documentation, they have given the following steps to integrate their checkout page on the merchant's website. So first step is initiating payment request. The second step is redirecting user to complete the payment. And the third step is redirecting user to the merchant web page again and fetch the status. So I've made a flow diagram here. As you can see from the merchant website, we will initiate a payment request. In the response, we will get the checkout URL to which we will redirect, which will open a checkout page of the PhonePe where the user can complete its payment. And then once the payment is completed, it will redirect to the merchant's redirect URL. And on this page, we will fetch the status of the payment and show the message whether it's success or in pending state or in failed state, whatever status the payment is in. Okay, so let's start by initializing a Express app node application. So to start with, first let's create an Express server. So we will do npm init for the Express server. We will need a dependency of Express. So let's install Express, and yeah, there should be a starting point. So we will create a index.js file. Inside package, let's write a script to start the node index.js. Let's include the dependency here, and the Express app will be running on some port, so let's define a port here. I won't be going into much detail as setting up an Express server is quite easy, so I guess you are already familiar with how the setup works. As you can see, our app is up and running at port 3002. Okay, and we can test that by going to the slash root 1000 slash PhonePe API. So our Express server is up and running now. Okay, now let's refer the documentation as which API should we integrate to initiate a payment request. UA testing. Okay, so for testing purpose, they have provided one URL on which we can test our PhonePe integration. So let's copy this host URL here and paste it in our code in as a constant. PhonePe host URL is equal to. The next thing is the merchant ID. For production, we need to contact with the PhonePe integration team to get the merchant ID. But for testing purpose, we can use this merchant ID. So let's add it in the code. And regarding the salt keys also, for the production access, we will have to contact PhonePe integration team. But for testing purpose, we can use this salt key index and the actual salt key. Salt index. Here the salt index is 1 and salt key is this key. Okay, so these are the 4 variables which are required by PhonePe for testing purpose. Okay, now the APIs which we need to integrate are I think that this will be present in the integration steps, API integration. Yeah. So the steps to integrate will be, first we need to initiate a payment request. So for that, the merchant does a server to server call to initiate a payment request. So our server will be calling the PhonePe server to initiate a request. In the response, a URL for that particular transaction returned for the payment gateway. As we saw here, when we initiate a payment, a URL will be received in the response of that request, and that URL can be used to redirect the user to the checkout page. So let's integrate this API first into our Express server, and for that API we need to refer here. So this is the API which we need to integrate. For the UAT host URL, we have already added the host URL here on which we need to call that. Okay, so let's start by making an API. So we will create a GET request itself, because for testing purpose we can create a GET request so that it can be called directly from the browser window. So let's create an API pay with the name pay to initiate a request. The endpoint of this URL is pg/v1/pay. Do this. Let's add this PhonePe endpoint, and this is a post request. So we will be making a post request to this URL, and let's check out what all details it will need. So for the request headers, we will need a content type as application JSON, xverify, and also here's a sample request they have provided, so we can copy the whole request. Const xuse. Okay, let's copy it. They have installed a dependency of Axios to make the API calls. We can install Axios. In the options, the Metaport URL, we already have the URL added in the constant, so we can replace it here with the constant. And the remaining part we have added here, so we can replace that variable. Okay. Except will be application JSON. We will be expecting a JSON format as they have mentioned here. Okay, I think that's it. Next will be these are the parameters, request parameters, which we will need to make the request. It contains merchant ID. Merchant ID we have already specified here. For testing, it will be a PG test pay UAD. Merchant transaction ID, it's generated by the merchant. It means we will generate a merchant ID that will be passed here. The amount will be in passe. Merchant user ID will be the user ID, the user who is initiating the payment from the merchant's website. Redirect URL, the URL where the user will be directed of the transaction completion. So the redirect URL will be our own endpoint which the user will be redirected to after they have completed the payment. So here, once the payment is completed, it will be redirected to a particular redirect URL. So we will have to specify our own URL here and all those things. So this is a sample request they have provided us. So let's copy it and we can paste it here. Const payload is equal to, the merchant ID is this, so we can replace this variable. Merchant transaction ID will be a unique ID created by merchant's website for each transaction. Okay, so to do that, let's create a unique ID every time this API is called. So we can use a library to create unique ID every time. So it's unique ID. Okay. Let's import that here. Okay. Const merchant transaction ID is equal to UID. Every time a request is called, this will create a unique ID, merchant transaction ID, and will pass your merchant user ID. For testing purpose, let's keep the user ID as 123. We'll pass this user ID here. This is the amount in paise. Suppose you want to make a payment of 300 rupees, then we'll multiply it by 100 to convert into paise. Redirect URL is the URL which will be called once the transaction is completed. So let's keep it as localhost 3002 as our server is running on 3002. Redirect URL slash, let's add merchant transaction ID as well, because that is a unique identifier for each transaction, and since the user will be redirected to this URL, we need a transaction ID to get the status of that particular payment. So let's pass this ID here as a path param. Okay, callback URL, we don't need callback URL here. Phone number can be any number of the user who is like initiating a payment, and payment type is pay page. Okay, so our payload is ready. Okay, so this is done. Now let's see the documentation. So what all things do we need here? So Canada X verify. So in X verify we will need this particular thing. So let's copy it. Const X verify is equal to, we will need this particular thing to be passed in X verify headers. So first, like, we need to convert this payload into base64 format, and then do SHA 256 encoding on all the three encoded payload, the endpoint, and the salt key, and then add triple hash plus salt index to make the actual X verify key. So let's do it. So first we need to create a buffer object. Okay, so the formula for buffer object is buffer dot from, and let's convert our payload into stringified format, comma qdf8. Okay, now converting into base64 encoded string. The formula is converting the buffer object to base64. So this, we have base64 encoded payload. We can name it as payload also, payload. Okay, now the X verify will be SHA 256. To use this, we need to install the dependency of SHA 256 and import it in our code. Let's do this. Okay, S24, and inside that we need a base64 encoded payload, which is this, plus we need the URL here, which we have stored in this variable pay endpoint, plus we need a salt key. So for testing purpose, the salt key is this, so we'll pass it here, and then we need to add triple hash. Then we need salt index, which is here for testing purpose, and here we go, the X verify is created here. Okay, and we need to pass this X verify in this variable X verify. So let's pass it in the headers X verify. Okay, and so now we need to pass the whole payload into the body and convert the JSON base64 encoded payload. The above request payload should be converted to base64 encoded payload, and then request should be sent in the below format. Okay, so we need to pass our base64 encoded payload as the value of the request key. So let's pass it here in the data. We need to pass request key with the value as base64 encoded payload. So this is the base64 encoded payload, and we'll pass it here. So I guess this code should work, and it should return the response with the data in this format. We haven't sent the response to this API, so let's change the code to response.send response.data. Now let's start the code and run it again. Yeah, so here we got the response from the initiate payment request. Let's check. Yeah, so in the response, we have got success through payment initiated. In the data, we have received a merchant ID, merchant transaction ID, and type a redirect info URL. Yeah, this is the URL to which we need to redirect the user to make the payment. So to do that, let's do it here. Const URL is equal to response.data dot instrument response dot redirect info dot redirect info dot URL. Let's print the URL, like what is the URL we are getting. Okay, let's do it again. So this is the URL we are getting. If we visit this URL, we will get the PhonePe checkout page where the user can enter his details and complete the payment process. So instead of going it like using the URL manually, you can directly redirect the user to this URL using our API itself. So we can do it response dot redirect URL. Okay, now restart the server. So as soon as the user will go to this API, a PhonePe checkout page will open and user can pay through this checkout page. Now there are some testing credentials which they have provided which we can use here. So in the UAT testing, these are some testing credentials which we can use to do the payment in the testing environment. So let's copy this. Credit card, credit card. Let's give it my name. 06 2027 06 2027 CVV 508 pay, and the OTP will be 123456 56 pay. So once the payment is completed, the checkout page redirected the user to this particular URL. So this is the same URL which we have mentioned here, as a redirect URL. So this Z1AH20, this code is the merchant transaction ID which we have created randomly for that particular request. So this API got called and this gave the error as cannot get, as we have not defined this route in our server. So let's create this particular API in a server so that we can get the status of that particular payment using this merchant transaction ID. Okay, so let's create one API here. API dot get redirect URL. Now to get the value of merchant transaction ID, we can get it from request.parents. So const merchant transaction ID, if merchant transaction ID, and we can response dot send merchant transaction ID, else let's try this if we're getting the merchant transaction ID or not. So let's initiate the payment again. Localhost 2000 pay. Okay, so for testing purpose we can add any of the any value of month and year. The only criteria is the year should be greater than the current year, or the date should be greater than the today's date. CVV anything, you can put password anything, pay. So once the payment got completed, it got redirected to this URL and our API is working fine. We got the merchant transaction ID. Now let's get the status of the payment we have done. So we need to refer the API docs again to get which API we need to call. So in the API integration, there's an API to check the status. Okay, so this is the API. So here we already have a sample request here provided by PhonePe. So we can copy this and we can put it inside our API. We already have the import statement at the top. PhonePe URL. Friends, we can do this. Merchant ID, we have it in the constant, so we can replace it here. And merchant transaction ID, we got it from the request params, so we can copy that here. Merchant transaction, this is the API, this is ready, and we need to change the accept as application JSON as we are passing in the JSON. This is a get request, and what else do we need here? In the content tab, we need application JSON. We have passed application JSON. Okay. In the Xverify, we need the same thing again, but with a different URL, I guess. Okay. And X merchant ID, using merchant ID, the merchant by PhonePe. Okay, so let's add this X merchant ID in our headers. X merchant ID will be the merchant ID assigned to the merchant by PhonePe. So this is the merchant transaction ID, and we also need a Xverify in the headers. This is Xverify, and const Xverify is equal to, what is the formula for SHA 256? This is the formula to calculate Xverify here. We need SHA 256, SHA 256. Okay, we need this URL to be appended here. Okay, merchant ID, merchant transaction ID, okay, plus the salt key, plus triple hash, plus salt index. We got Xverify and we will be passing it in the headers. And let's send the response as response.data. Okay, so this, I guess, will return the response as similar to this object with a payment success or payment failure or payment error, whatsoever the payment status is. So let's try it out. Let's run the server again, and let's call the pay API here. The payment got initiated. We will add our card details to it. We take Tucker 6 1 2 3 go 1 2 3 4 5 6 pay. So the payment flow is completed, and this will redirect us to redirect URL, and here we are getting merchant transaction ID. Okay, so we haven't commented this, that's why we got the same response back. Okay, let's start the server and call the pay API to initiate the payment. Payment got initiated. We entered the card details. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Our payment flow got completed. Now it will redirect us to this, and we got our response as this object. We can check our response here. So our payment is successful. Your payment is successful. Data, we got all the details, the amount, the state, response code, and the payment details through which the payment was done. Now we can add conditions here. For example, if response or data dot code, which is this, is payment success, is equal to payment success, then you can redirect the user to front end success page. Else you can check the documentation. If the payment is error, if payment.error, then you can redirect the user to front end error page. Else you can show the pending page, like the pending is in process, and in the background you can make an API calls every 1 minute or 2 minute and get the status of the payment, whether it is completed, whether it is success or error. So this is the whole flow of the PhonePe payment gateway. So a quick summary. So as soon as a user wants to make a payment, so it will initiate a payment using this API 3002 pay. So this will uh, the initiating payment URL will return a checkout URL. We will redirect the user to this checkout URL, which will open a checkout page where the user can make the payment. And once the payment is completed, the PhonePe will redirect the user to the merchant's redirect URL, which in turn will get the status of the payment done. And if the status is success, we will internally redirect the user to a success page of the front end. And if it's an error stage, we can redirect the user to the front end error stage. So that's the whole process of the payment gateway integration. So that's it for this video. You can find the code on GitHub and detailed insights in the Medium article. Both the links I've mentioned in the description below. Your feedback is crucial, so drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more content. Happy coding, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.